Thanks for joining us in our deep dive session on resilience on the front lines, building clean, healthy cities for clean, healthy seas. These are extraordinary times, as we all know, and not in a good way. COVID-19 is creating impacts that we won't understand for some time. And we appreciate everyone who's working on a daily basis to deal with those impacts. We also appreciate everyone who's working to ensure we can and will emerge stronger and more resilient. And I would put everyone who's participating in these sessions in that category. Closer to home in the US, I want to acknowledge everyone, many of whom are city leaders, who are fighting for a just, equitable, and peaceful society. The Circulate Initiative, Global Resilient Cities Network, and Ocean Conservancy believe that this is an absolutely essential basis for any of the work that we're talking about. And one of the reasons that we believe it's critical to align our work to protect the ocean with the priorities and needs of communities and cities. We are interconnected, and none of us can make progress on our own or on the backs of someone else. But if we align our efforts, we can create better and more lasting solutions. And so I'm grateful to have an opportunity today to talk about positive actions we can take and positive solutions. We're here to talk about ocean pollution, but also about how we can work together to end it, because I believe it is possible for us to end it. And at the same time, create resilient and healthy communities. Most of the plastic in the ocean we know comes from land, from our linear systems, mismanaged waste systems. And this has severe consequences for the ocean, but also for human well-being. And we know that in order to address this, we need to have a full range of solutions. We need to reduce, we need to rethink and redesign our packaging and our products. We need to collect and properly manage these materials. We need to reuse them, recycle them, and we need to get them out of the environment. A key piece of that circle and that circular economy is a waste management system that is functioning. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has worsened existing vulnerabilities within our waste management system and exposed new ones. Now, cities are on the front lines of these issues, and they play a key role in managing waste for our communities. They also have the ability to work directly with businesses, with citizens, to inform and educate the public, and to provide incentives and disincentives for actions to advance circularity. And so in our session, we're centered on the role of cities in developing urban resilience to ensure healthier oceans and communities, and the way we can work across sectors and silos to achieve common and aligned goals. And so I'm very excited to have this amazing panel of people here today to talk about these issues. So today we have Mahesh Harahare, who is the Chief Resilience Officer of the city of Pune, India. He's an expert in urban management and governance across city infrastructure and investment, and has worked extensively to help improve urban water and sanitation across more than 40 cities and towns in India. We have Lauren Sorkin, who is the Executive Director of Global Resilient Cities Network, where she oversees global efforts to strengthen cities in the face of complex and interconnected challenges, enhancing the resilience of communities and infrastructure. We have Dr. Sonia Maria Diaz, a waste specialist with Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, also known as WIGO. Sonia is an expert in gender dynamics and waste work, and has been instrumental in promoting social inclusion, gender equity, and occupational health in waste forms worldwide. We have Vijay Padmanabhan, Urban Development and Water Division, who is the Director of the Urban Development and Water Division of the Southeast Asian region for the Asian Development Bank. And he leads technical and knowledge support for ADB's Urban Sector Group, and for over 21 years has led multi-sector teams in designing and delivering large and complex projects on urban development, water and sanitation across Asia Pacific. And finally, we have Ben Jordan, who's the Senior Director for Environmental Policy at the Coca-Cola Company, where he drives Coca-Cola's sustainability programs on climate, packaging, and agriculture. So clearly we've got a great conversation ahead of us. Before we get started, on behalf of the Circulate Initiative, Ocean Conservancy, and Global Resilient Cities Network, I want to make an announcement that will help set the stage a bit for this conversation. I would like to announce our first cohort of partner cities in our Urban Ocean program. And over the next 15 months, we'll be working with these cities to bring new ideas, partners, resources, all together to support the creation of strategies and solutions that can holistically address circularity, plastic pollution, waste management, all to prevent ocean plastic, but also to help cities achieve their related goals around improving public health, providing for economic development and decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm very excited that Mahesh is here representing one of those cities, Pune. The other cities in the group are Kanta in Vietnam, Malacca in Malaysia, Semarang in Indonesia, and Panama City in Panama. So thank you to all of you, and we're very excited to be working with you. And I welcome all of our panelists and everyone who's in this session to join us as partners in this journey. So let's get started. I would like this to be as interactive as possible, given our situation. So please, if you have questions, send them to us via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be collecting those and addressing as many as we can towards the end of the session. We also encourage you to tweet out your insights and thoughts with the hashtag #UrbanOcean, as well as Ocean Dialogues, so we can reach beyond this event today. And then finally, we're going to launch a quick poll just to get your ideas on a few key questions that can inform the discussion, but also help inform our program going forward. So that will open now. A box should come up on your screen, and we'll close that in about 10 minutes. And without further ado, I'm going to kick off with a question to Mahesh. Thank you for being part of the Urban Ocean program. We're really excited to have Pune. Why do you think that cities should engage on the ocean pollution issue, and why is Pune part of this program?
Yeah, thank you, Susan, and thank you all. I think first of all, I'd like to give background about Pune. Pune is around 5 million population city. Like other Asian cities, we know that population is a major challenge for cities in Asia and India. At the same time, the people living in informal settlements is another challenge, where around 20 to 40% of the population lives in informal settlement. So that brings complexity to the management issue of solid waste management in cities and also smaller towns. So I think this kind of a platform is very critical to bring all the cities within the network, especially cities within the GRCN network and other cities which are learning. So there are some best practices which are happening. For example, in case of Pune, there is a very well-known PPP arrangement where waste pickers are brought under one umbrella through an NGO, and then they are actually serving the citizens through waste picking and actually doing recycling. So in circularity, they are playing very important role. I think to take that forward and also to learn and ideate with other cities, this platform is very critical, not only for coastal cities, but also landlocked cities, because they also have a large network of rivers and water bodies.
Thank you. Lauren, I want to turn to you. GRCN works with almost 100 cities. You work on a wide range of issues, including now COVID. Why take on ocean pollution in addition to all of that? And are there a lot of cities that are thinking like Pune?
Thanks, Susan. And let me just say first that we're thrilled to be announcing tonight the Urban Ocean program in the first cities. To your question, there are many issues that confront cities, and in particular right now with a focus in the world on COVID-19, you know, the first priority in most places is preservation of life, you know, no matter where we are. But what we're seeing is that, you know, the pandemic is exacerbating existing problems. It's producing more plastic and household waste. And during an outbreak or during a cascading crisis like a flood and the increase of waste, we really see that cities are on the front lines of managing, and for the immediate safety as well as the long-term welfare of our cities and communities, we have to address waste management. And we even have to go beyond waste management to circular economy. And it's really city leaders who know, because in most cases, waste management is a very local issue that the local government pays for. Most people don't know where their waste goes, and they really don't even think about the waste system until something is going wrong. But having that kind of local understanding and integration in a city government is really critical for solving the waste management issue. Keeping waste out of the environment, out of the ocean and our food system is really not just a part of an environmental agenda. It's part of a health agenda. It's part of an agenda that we need to prioritize for resilient recovery. So, you know, we know that city leaders have been grappling with these issues for a very long time. And so with COVID-19, it's exacerbating this risk. It's increasing risk of failure. There could not be a better time to come together and focus on the systemic issues, in particular in the global south, where inadequacies in investment in infrastructure over time have been building. And so this is really an important contribution where cities, the private sector, and finance can come together and say, we have solutions and we have financing mechanisms that can make this a reality. This becomes a very important contribution to our carbon footprint reduction, to recovering resources, to improving environmental conditions, and to creating good quality jobs, in particular in our low income communities. And a lot of these contributions of the waste management sector are not really accounted for. They're not acknowledged, but there is this enormous potential. So this is really why Global Resilient Cities Network is moving into this space. We're thrilled to be partnering with experts from the Circulate Initiative and your partners and the Ocean Conservancy to really bring the strengths of a committed and progressive city network together with the expertise of the scientists, of the private sector, and investors who know how to do this right.
Thank you. Sonia, Lauren touched on a couple of key issues, and Mahesh did as well, and the importance of the informal sector really in so many cities as the foundation for the waste management system, and really the front lines to protect the ocean. So how can cities partner with informal sector workers and civil society to really improve their waste management systems and help prevent pollution, and at the same time really provide dignified employment and support these communities?
Thank you so much, Susan. I think this is a very important question. I was a city officer in the past, so I really know that cities can do a lot. And especially in the context of the issue related to plastics, we know that the majority of plastics in the ocean comes from the land. So improvement of solid waste management and also protection of the jobs of the working poor, it's very important. And cities can do a lot because they can build inclusive recycling systems, inclusive solid waste collection systems, and contract collectives of informal workers to perform door-to-door collection of household waste or door-to-door collection of recyclables. And let's take the case of Pune, where Swatch Cooperative plays such a crucial role in ensuring household waste collection in the city. In fact, they are essential workers, not only during this pandemic, but they have been playing a very important role in terms of filling in the gap in municipal service delivery of household waste collection. So cities can design their inclusive, they can design their systems, solid waste systems in inclusive ways by contracting these collectives, and they can also invest in building capacity of waste pickers to deliver the services in the adequate ways that citizens need. And cities can also support with infrastructure, with equipments, vehicles for collection. So it is something about building an inclusive solid waste management agenda. In WIGO, we have this 10 steps inclusive solid waste management agenda, and it begins from what is our main mantra and the waste pickers organization's mantra. Build from what already exists and build with the workers. Nothing for us without us. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben, did I see you raise your hand? Or no? Okay. In that case, BJ, I want to take another aspect of this problem. Lack of investment is a key challenge in a lot of cities to really improving integrated waste management systems and helping to really advance the circular economy. So how can cities attract more investments into the sector? And how can partnerships like this one that are so multi-sectoral help?
Thank you, Susan. I just want to take a couple of points on how ADB's kind of transformed its vision and approach. From being purely a lending organization, we've taken a bit more of a strategic approach on thematic-based support. So last year we had our strategy 2030 being announced, where we had 7 operational priorities. And one of them was on climate change, disaster risk management, and environmental sustainability. The other was on making cities livable, and the third was to look at strengthening institutions and governance. So when you look at it from a city perspective, I guess the most important part is looking at the institution, looking at governance, improving the financial systems, creditworthiness, and so on. And this would be an excellent platform for cities to make themselves more attractive, and then they can also look at different types of investments in some sense. Where ADB comes in is that we can play a catalytic role over here. One is to provide different financing instruments, moving from a spectrum of policy-based instruments to results-based instruments or even project lending. This allows us to actually leverage our instruments to then deliver solutions to these cities. The third point is on proof of concept. Invariably, it's always been a problem to demonstrate results at different scales. And ADB, with its different partnerships, we partner with startups, we partner with universities, research and development. We bring in these options available to the cities so that they can test it at scale. And then once they're able to test it at scale, they can actually look at replication, either within the same city in different geographies or across the province or the country itself. So these are the different areas in which ADB is supporting cities. And I guess the most important part is really to look at the institution, the strengthening of the governance, financial management systems, and creditworthiness. And that's where we're trying to play a long-term role, taking a more programmatic approach rather than a pure project lending approach, so that we can be with institutions over the long haul, 15, 20 years, and then look at transformation. And then they're able to actually pick up and support in different spaces. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ben, I wanted to turn to you because the private sector is really another important piece of this puzzle. And I know companies like Coca-Cola have made a lot of big commitments regarding stopping plastic leakage. So how, you've heard about some of the other pieces of the puzzle, how are your efforts supporting work that cities and financial institutions and the informal sector are doing? And how can we really bring all of this together to achieve these multiple goals?
Sure. Thanks, Susan. We launched our World Without Waste program in 2018 to really drive the circular economy for our packaging. We want to make packaging waste a problem of the past. And so we have goals around the design of our packaging, the collection and recycling of our packaging. So by 2025, we want 100% of our packaging to be fully recyclable. By 2030, we want every package to have 50% recycled material in it. And for every package we put in the marketplace by 2030, we want to help bring one back through recycling and collection programs. We can't do this alone. And in fact, we're one brand here, one private sector representative, but many other brands and global companies have made similar global commitments. And we know that we can only achieve these commitments through collective action. And so we've really spent the last couple of years really revamping our approach to partnership and collective action from the global to the regional to the local level. And that's really the only way that we're going to see this progress happen. We're not just out there wanting to recycle Coca-Cola packaging, right? Very few programs approach just one brand's package, right? It's all about city level, local level recycling programs and waste management programs, and how can we support those and really lift the recycling rates for all packaging.
Thank you. So Mahesh, I want to turn back to you because you've heard sort of all these other pieces that the different panelists and sectors are doing. And so I'm curious, how do you see that all these efforts should be tied into the priorities of the cities to ensure the long-term success of this work, and particularly as we think about recovery after and during COVID-19 and the sort of stimulus packages and the work that'll be done there. And I'll bring in something just for everyone to think about too. We're starting to get our poll results, and it says that one of the biggest obstacles for cities in helping to prevent ocean pollution and circularity is really policy, legislation, and regulation. 57% of the audience said that that's a key piece here. So clearly cities have a really important role because that's squarely within your toolbox.
Yeah, I think the other panelists have already highlighted the part that it's a more of a local problem where you need engagement of all the stakeholders, unlike other sectors in a city where, for example, water supply, sewerage, where it's not that much local since it's a system based. But in case of a solid waste management, it's more of a citizen engagement, bringing all stakeholders together. For example, there is something called as the EPR, where the enterprise or the corporate is responsible for managing its own waste. But country like India, where you have so much distributed population, you cannot even collect that kind of a waste without help of this informal sector or the network of informal sector. So these kind of solutions are required, and I think there is a lot of cross learning is there, but unfortunately due to COVID kind of a situation, a lot of gaps are exposed. For example, in many places, the health workers are above 50 years of age who are actually vulnerable to COVID-like situation. So there, can we use technology? Can we have a digital platform to actually map that? Then one of the important aspects is basically looking at solid waste management as one of the priority areas, because in many cities in India and Asia, road and infrastructure, bigger water supply projects are always a priority because of political and other reasons, and they are like a tangible assets. But the day-to-day problem or a challenge is waste management, which is never seen as a priority issue. I think because of this COVID pandemic, now a lot of focus will be on a sanitation issue, especially in the informal settlements, where we are seeing a lot of hotspots are there, a lot of containment areas are around those hotspots or those squatter settlements, informal settlements. So 3-4 areas. One, from urban planning perspective, the city will look at these informal settlements in a different way. Sanitation definitely will come out as a priority area. But again, the finances will be a major challenge for cities since they have skewed priorities. So there, these kind of platforms, newer ventures, innovative technology, disruptive technology, digital platform, for example, use of IoT to basically track the entire waste. Earlier, we were just talking about one form of waste, that is recyclables. Now we are talking about 12 forms of waste within the recyclables. It's e-waste, it's a furniture, it's a plastic waste. So we are now talking about different forms of waste. So can other cities learn from it, and can we learn from the COVID situation to use different technologies and digitalization platform to basically strengthen the informal economy and then also take help of the corporates? I think that is a major, I think I see going forward.
Thank you. And Sonia, I think that brings me back to a question for you, and I'll highlight another result from our poll. One of the big challenges that the audience has identified for waste management, particularly in COVID, is the health and safety of waste workers. And 43% of the audience have flagged that as a key issue. And so, hearing Mahesh's points and thinking about, in the midst of COVID-19, with so many in the informal sector who are really vulnerable and struggling, what do you think is the most important thing that a partnership of cities and companies and NGOs like Urban Ocean can bring to the table to help that sector?
Thanks so much for this question. I think one important thing is to depart from an understanding of the pre-existing injustice and disadvantages that informal waste workers face. And, disadvantages that are related to the poor health conditions, as the poll, highlighted, lack of social protection, the low levels of education, poor housing, lack of basic infrastructure, lack of workers' rights, and the unfair employment relationships that these workers face, which actually adds is an additional layer of vulnerability. So partnerships like that can help raise awareness of this pre-existing injustice and the need to address COVID-19, taking this into account. And these partnerships can help raise awareness about the contributions of these workers as frontliners in the fight of COVID, because what we see now is the kind of beginning of increasing the already pre-existed stigmatization these workers suffer. And so partnerships like that can help raise awareness of the relevance of the work, and also help support them to have access to basic cash grants, to PPE, personal equipments, protective equipments. And we can see from our reducing waste in coastal cities project how in some of the cities that we work in, it's the workers' organizations that are actually doing all the efforts to raise safety issues and to provide workers with access to PPE. You know, cities like in the car, you know, the workers are the ones who are actually being very busy in providing masks and other PPE equipments for the dump pickers. So I think partnerships like that can help raise awareness and provide access and distribute the necessary equipments and social, and support them with social protection measures like cash grants and food baskets.
Vijay, please.
Thank you, Susan. I just want to touch upon a point that Mahesh brought up on urban planning, looking at sprawl and financing. Just as an example, we're working in the province of Palawan in Philippines, in the cities of El Nido and Coron. And if you really look at the space with which the economy has grown, it's actually contingent on some of the aspects that are well beyond a city planning itself. Just a change in the airline industry and the availability of different aircraft spaces has actually allowed these cities to grow so fast that urban planning has not really kept up with that growth. Consequently, what's happened is urban infrastructure itself has not been well planned. And then you have these multiple effects or the negative impacts of bad planning, where you have sewage being discharged directly into the Bay Area. And then you have, again, a lack of space for looking at how you manage waste. First is to collect, of course, and then also to manage waste. So, if you don't tie up the policies at different levels, one is in terms of the national level, how do you bring in different industries, look at the economy itself and how it's spiking in terms of growth, and then link it back with planning for these destinations. It's going to have an impact. And what we see in Southeast Asia is most of these cities, whether they are along the Mekong or in the coastal area, they're all tourism-based economies. And today, the Philippines, of course, due to COVID, is going to suffer extensively because of the lack in tourism, cash flows coming in. But I guess the fundamental point is how do you link planning with the other aspects in terms of connectivity, communication, and therefore, can you actually work on things like development control regulations to ensure that you have a much more better planned system? Because that if that's not taken care of, you're going to be always trying to catch up, and you'll never have the investments in place, and you'll always be catching up. So maybe that's something as organizations we are also trying to consciously look into, because land use planning, development control, economy growth, these are all never stitched together. It's all been very ad hoc in some way, and then you have the repercussions subsequently. So that's something I just wanted to bring to the table.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Lauren, I mean, that makes me think, so we're thinking about a really global issue here, obviously. And so I guess as you think about it from a network point of view, how do you think about the contribution individual cities can make? And then how can you sort of really amplify that? And, based on some of the observations that BJ made, how can cities learn from each other so we don't have to repeat these processes over and over again and make the same mistakes and, relearn the same lessons? Like, how can we really help leverage each other?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I also think it merits saying that sometimes we look back and we sort of say, well, the city did this ad hoc or the city did that ad hoc. Well, the city didn't have funds for all of those things at the same time. And I think that having a partner is really important in that journey. And I know ADB has done a lot more of that kind of comprehensive urban planning, whether it's the green growth strategies for cities or others, and many other institutions have started taking that holistic approach. And that's something that as a resilient cities network, we stress in everything we do. We cannot operate in terms of sectors. You cannot operate as an urban sector or a water sector or a transport sector in a city. A city is a system. And so if you are really going to move a city forward, you have to look at that city as a system, and you have to understand how you're prioritizing those investments. So I couldn't agree more with the points that Vijay made about that kind of a holistic approach and a planning-based approach. And I think we can't take back decisions that might have been made in the moment to try to develop with the best possible information cities had. But going back to what Mahesh said, we live in an age of information sharing and of data. So I think in terms of networks, it's a good time to be both involved in a network and also supporting a network, because we could say, what's the difference that an individual makes? But you could also say, what could one European teenager have to do with solving the global climate crisis? Or tragically, you could say, what could the loss of one gentleman's life in a Midwestern city in the US, cause a nation to wake up and address years and years of structural inequality? But yet we have lived those realities. So when we see an individual going and progressing and a city going and progressing, there is nothing more compelling or more convincing than that, because cities learn best from other cities because you can see yourself in that city. If I'm the city of Thane, I might see myself in Pune, but not see myself in New York. But if I'm Shanghai, then I see myself, in New York or Los Angeles as my peers. So our job as a city network is to work on the innovation with experts and with scientists and with funders to show what can be done, and then to share that in such a way that cities can relate to it really easily and see themselves there. Innovation is not a mass market, right? Innovation is for pioneers. That's why we call them pioneers. You need a few really strong examples in key markets, and those key cities can be your tipping points. They can be that leading edge. And so they can demonstrate that within a network. They can also demonstrate it within a country. And when we're talking about waste management, where we're talking about circular economy, we know that there are certain hotspots of plastic pollution into our oceans. And, as someone who's lived and worked in South and Southeast Asia for the last 10 years, it's mostly in our region. So we need to invest where there are hotspots, and we need to give those cities more support. And so I think that that's what we very much intend to do through the work that we're doing, the Circulate in Oceans Conservancy, and make that available through our global community of practice, which is open even beyond our network. So I do want to give a plug for that. It's an open community of practice. Experts, funders, cities from all over the world are welcome to join, and we'll share the knowledge and experience of cities like Pune or like Malacca or Kanto in that space.
Thank you. There's a lot there. We could go on for the rest of the morning or evening on that. But maybe I'll turn it to Ben, because, you know, Ben, clearly there's a huge opportunity there, right? To mobilize that network in those bright spots, and really show what works and get other cities engaged. So I guess, can you give an example of the type of work that, you know, like how can Coca-Cola really leverage that and partner with these cities to achieve not only your goals for the world without waste, but the city's goals around circular economy and building resilient and healthy communities?
Sure, and just to maybe back up a second and build on some of the things Lauren was saying, you know, I think this global to local dynamic is just so important here. And when I think about some of the global partnerships that we're engaged in, you know, whether it's, you know, Ellen MacArthur Foundation and you know, group of big brands like ours, you know, making similar commitments, or it's the Consumer Goods Forum, a little bit of the same, you know, the broader group of consumer goods companies. You know, things like the World Economic Forum, Global Plastics Action Partnership, or Circulate Capital and the Circulate Initiative. You know, all of those programs are trying to push that ethic, that commitment, right, that idea down to the local level, right? You know, and when I think about it, you know, in our context, you know, some of it might be things like, you know, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation movement towards more plastic packs at the national and the local level, to get multi-stakeholder groups together and agree on what exactly should that goal be in this place. And it's not just about a global commitment here, but how do we make those commitments and put those into action in the local area. In terms of a few local examples from our side, you know, we're deeply engaged in places like Mexico City with our bottling partner Coca-Cola FEMSA, and some support with the Ocean Conservancy. Long-standing plastics coalition, the full plastics supply chain, is engaged in an entity called ECOSE, which really drives awareness and education around recycling and allows us to turn old bottles into new bottles through really high collection rates through the informal sector. So we have PetStar, which is the world's largest bottle-to-bottle recycling plant that's located just outside Mexico City. And we're using 100% recycled PET plastic bottles in many of our bottles there in Mexico. We have similar efforts to that one ongoing in South Africa, more and more in places like India, in Indonesia, where a lot of these things are coming together, right? A lot of these global partnerships all focused on Indonesia as such a big priority from the standpoint of ocean leakage. And then you have efforts like in Central and Eastern Europe, the Zero Waste Cities Initiative, that our Central and Eastern European team, along with our bottler there, CocaCola Hellenic, starting first in Thessaloniki, Greece. And then even here in the U.S., where our Coca-Cola North America business unit is pushing forward a model markets program, engaging with organizations like the Recycling Partnership, which is really the lead organization for engaging with municipalities around recycling in the U.S., on 7 model markets across the U.S. So different types of cities, trying to figure out what is that little model of perfection around circular economy in the U.S. and how do you replicate that to other cities.
Thank you. And I'll just say, one of our poll results said that access to, sorry, I got distracted because Lauren's daughter is very cute. One of our poll results says that 52% of our respondents said that the corporates are a valuable collaborator for cities on waste management and circular economy. So I think what we've been saying has just been reinforced by that. Vijay, I want to come back to something you said earlier. You said that at the ADB, you look at investing and partnering on these issues for the long term, 10 to 15 years. And you said it sort of almost in passing, but I think it's worth drawing out because it's not a common thing to have that kind of investment in a partnership. And I think it's really important, particularly as we think about the types of issues that we're trying to deal with. So I guess if you could expand a little bit more from a multilateral bank like the ADB, what are the kinds of things you bring to the table? We know you bring funding, obviously, and one of our poll results says that access to funding is probably, or 74% of the votes in our poll say that access to funding is one of the most critical pieces of support that cities need to help their recovery from COVID. Clearly, money is important, but how do you help provide that access, but also back it up with some of the types of programs and partnerships that can really make that work.
Thanks, Susan. I think it's an important aspect in terms of how we really engage. In the past, like I've mentioned, it's been purely a project lending approach where we just take an infrastructure and then we go and finance the infrastructure. But that's not been the case in the last few years, where we've realized that you need this long-term engagement. Just as an example, we could take the city of Battambang in Cambodia, where it's a part of the Tonle Sap Basin, tourist destination, extremely important for Cambodia as a secondary city. And we've had different projects in the past there, but looking at a few infrastructure sectors like water supply or sewerage and sanitation. But what we've realized is that it's not going to help the city if we just focus on one single infrastructure or a subsector. We need to take a bit more of a holistic view. We need to take a perspective which is much more long-term. And then you look at different aspects of not just the infrastructure, you look at livelihood, you look at health, education, and then you look at connectivity, and then also the institution in itself, where we're trying to build and improve their financial management system, but also internal governance. And last but not the least, the partnerships, whether it's with CSOs, with business units in the city itself, and also to bring in other players. It's not the city alone in terms of infrastructure that's important. We just look at the ecology there, ecosystem management around, looking at fisheries, looking at tourism, the economy itself. So that's the perspective we've started taking and said, you got to be there for the long haul. The other aspect that we bring in along with financing is the partnerships. So we have a number of trust funds where we bring in partners. For example, we have the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund, which has UK DFID, Swiss SECO, and the Rockefeller Foundation actually invested in it. It's about a $150 million trust fund that looks at climate change and urban resilience. Now, these partners actually bring in global knowledge. They don't just bring in financing. They provide grant financing for us to, again, like I said, test proof of concept. One of the investments that we're doing right now is in the city of Makassar, where we're working in informal settlements, trying to apply nature-based solutions to look at sanitation systems there. And it also is a partnership with the Monash University and the Wellcome Trust, where we try and look at health aspects, cognitive skills of children, and how these actually impact by improving sanitation systems. So ADB is also a platform where we can bring in research and development, bring in partners, bring in financing, grant financing to test proof of concept. So these are the two different areas that we are playing on right now, because you need that long-term engagement and you need investments at scale. You can't just go in for one-time investment and assume that everything will become all right. So that's really what's driving us these days. And then climate change, we have our own targets. By 2020, this year, we were supposed to hit a $6 billion climate financing target. We also have targets on, we have a program on healthy oceans and sustainable blue economies. By 2023, we're looking at about $3 to $4 billion investments in that space. But all this is again driven by long-term engagement. It's not just one-off kind of engagements that we want to look at. We've probably not engaged that deeply, I should say, in terms of the private sector or with CSOs when we look at a number of these urban projects. And what we've done now is to have a few of these policy-based loans where we're bringing in the COVID pandemic response support to countries. And we have subcommittees that will specifically focus on working with CSOs, looking at application of digital data, looking at the private sector, utilities, and policy-based decisions. So that's where we are also using this, well, we would say it's an opportunity, the pandemic, to actually expand our connections and partnerships. So that's again another area that we're really engaging more deeply in now. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop because we've got questions coming in from the audience and I want to be able to take some of those. So I have a question here basically on something we haven't touched on before, which is the types of different materials that are leaking out into the ocean. So we have a question that says, for developing countries in particular, although I don't think it's just developing countries, where do you begin decreasing dependency on the sachet economy? that's widespread. And so these are, for those who don't know, the little single-use packets of either soaps or sometimes water, other things that are quite common in a lot of countries. How do you sort of move away from that throughout the whole region and really start to deal with those types of disposable plastics that we often find in the ocean or in the environment because they have very little value? And Mahesh, maybe I'll start with you and see if that problem resonates with you.
I think that is very critical, especially in developing countries where you have a large demand and then it's a good market for industries. But I think it cannot be solved only by regulation or penalization. There, the involvement of industry is very critical. As Ben was saying, a rightly designed packaging system, which can be non-plastic or which can be biodegradable, is very critical. And at the same time, there is a lot of research is required in terms of developing those kind of a solution. So it should go hand in hand, government regulation. At the same time, some kind of incentivization, research and development need to be done by the industries, where government should support in doing that, so that there is an alternative available to those kind of products. And at the same time, the awareness need to be created in the citizens, so that the use and throw kind of a material is not used. So all the stakeholders need to be brought on the platform, and then it need to be taken up further.
Great, thank you. Sonia, I wonder if you have a perspective on that, because I know the informal sector is often the first line of picking up some of these issues, and yet they also tend to use a lot of these materials. I'm just wondering if you have a perspective on how we might address this type of material from that perspective.
In addition to what Mahesh has already raised, I think it is important that we invest on building capacity on the informal sector to actually be able to provide a service in terms of reclaiming these materials, because we need to make it available, some incentives for them. Otherwise, it won't be really, we won't be able to get them engaged. We need to remember that they are the ones who are at the bottom of the pyramid, facing the highest risks and often getting the lowest pay. So we need to build incentives and build their capacity.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to another question that we received, and this is in the context of the cyclones, COVID-19. I'm thinking about port and harbor cities with lots of commercialization and waste disposal. How do we build the capacity of government officials to implement policies and guidelines with community participation, so that they're doing these in the correct ways and not exploiting coastal systems and actually being effective? And I don't know, maybe I'll ask Vijay and Mahesh to answer that question from your different perspectives. Mahesh is obviously representing a city and what's most useful, and Vijay, potentially through some of the programs that ADB might offer. So Mahesh, maybe you could start.
Yeah, I think many cities, especially I'm talking from the Asian perspective or Indian perspective, the lack of preparedness is, I think, very critical in those disasters, which is actually causing more harm to the biodiversity than the routine activities. I think but disaster management is always seen as a proactive area rather than preparing for that, especially in Indian and Asian cities. But that is changing. If you see states like Orissa in India, where they are used to now cyclone-like condition and they are very well prepared. Even in their planning now, they are looking at biodiversity as a critical aspect, because in fact, during the last flooding a couple of months back, even the state of West Bengal have kind of experienced that the vegetation there, the biodiversity there kind of helped to reduce the impact of the flood in those situations. I think that is slowly coming out where cities are now focusing on biodiversity, but still a lack of baseline data available, again, lack of use of technology, lack of awareness among citizens, which is again a very major area where typically Indian governments lack in that aspect in terms of people engagement. I think if those are addressed in a very well manner, then biodiversity can be protected in those kind of situations.
Thank you. Vijay, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Just a couple of points, Susan. I've mentioned before that we have these different financing instruments, and we've looked at a large policy-based support for a number of Southeast Asian countries where we're creating space to engage more with the CSOs, the private sector, and probably providing that kind of an avenue for looking at financing, actually creating these discussion spaces and bringing in supports from different areas. But what we've done recently is we're partnering with the Australia Water Association, for example, where we're looking at water and sanitation as a space, and we are trying to see whether we can create a complete guidebook and details on how they handle these kind of responses. So we work with, for example, the WHO to create the water resilience kind of a handbook. We're looking at sanitation safety planning. So again, like I said, the partnerships are important, working with different organizations, practitioners like utilities and city governments. We're using these platforms to bring them in so that they can collaborate with different cities in Southeast Asia or even South Asia, where they're bringing in actual practical experience. So it's much more easier to work there because they kind of listen to each other in terms of how they operate, but also they understand and they speak the same language. So that's much more better form of engagement for us. So these are the two levels of interface ADB is actually providing.
Thank you. I have a question for Sonia. Sonia, the question points out that waste pickers in metropolitan cities, whether they're coastal or not coastal, have a large percentage of them are migrants. And with COVID-19, we think there's an exodus of a lot of migrants from these cities. And so the question is, how can we engage and provide waste pickers with the social protection and permanent jobs in cities, and what's the role of municipality in some of that?
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing is for us to have an understanding that waste pickers provide services both for cities and for the industry. Because for the cities, they are providing, health collection, so contributing to public health. And for the industries, they are actually providing a service that reclaims the materials that feed value chains. So both governments and industries have a role in that. So this is, I think, it's what I want to state up front. So I'll revert to a practical example, okay? In the context of my country, I'm Brazilian, and here we devised our EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme, in a way that integrates the informal collector of recyclables, because here they collect only recyclables, as partners and key agents in the EPR system, and by devising mechanisms that enable what we call it here, the sectoral agreements between governments, the industry, and the representatives of informal workers. Through these sectoral agreements, goals are reached, for metals, for plastics, whatever, okay? And during this COVID crisis, these EPR mechanisms have been very handy. And I'll give an example of a given industry from the hygiene sector, which devised a scheme that provided cash grants and PPE for over 5,000 workers across the 23 states in Brazil. So it is a concrete example of how governments and industries can play a role.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we are coming very close to the end of the session. So I want to be sure to be able to share our poll results. So I think we can get those up so that everyone can see them. Should be a panelist and audience as well, so we can take a look. Yep, there we go. Hopefully everyone can see them. And maybe while people are looking at these, if I could just ask our panelists, I'm curious how you would all answer this first question. What are the biggest obstacles to cities' abilities to preventing ocean pollution and building circular economy solutions? And maybe we could just go around quickly. So if anyone wants to volunteer, otherwise I'll call on someone to start.
I think stakeholder collaboration is very critical from my point of view.
Great, thank you.
It's partnerships. I think that's really critical.
Yes, and if I may, in addition to partnerships, I think we need to embrace the notion of integrated and sustainable solid waste management as a kind of guideline. And this means that in the sustainable part of this framework, we need to address livelihoods.
I would second what Sonia said. I think you need the combination of the partnerships, the stakeholders across different types of actors, as well as that framework policy. You need those principles, you need those regulations to be in place to give you a kind of a framework under which that group can come together, or that group can advocate for the framework, right? It's not always in that order, but the two together is very powerful.
Great, thank you.
Just looking at the selections, participation of the public or consumer participation was not an option. I think it's inherent in many of the other ones, right? But I think that's a big one to focus on as well.
Great, thank you. And we're now looking at this question about the problems in the waste sector. We've all talked a little bit about, obviously, COVID-19 and recovery. And so I really appreciate these in terms of thinking about some of the solutions that we should be focusing on as we're building our program. So thank you for all the answers on this and the participation from the audience. And this is the third, I believe this is the third of the 4 questions. So clearly, everyone agrees that your role is extremely important in all of this, although obviously there's lots of emphasis as well on the need for local businesses and NGOs as well. And this is the last question that we shared, which is really focused again on resilient recovery. So obviously a big role for ADB to play here in terms of access to funding and financing, but clearly a lot of important other things, these platforms for sharing, methodologies, partnerships, and you've all highlighted that as well. So thank you for that. Thank you to all of the panelists again for taking the time in the beginning and the ends of your days to be part of this panel. We are basically out of time, but I really appreciate this. I consider this the beginning of a conversation, the beginning of the partnership. And so I look forward to continuing it, and I invite everyone else who is in the audience to be part of the solution as well. So thank you very much again to everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.